r/AskReddit. Serious, people who have been clinically dead and brought back to life, what was your experience? When I was 10 years old I fell from the roof of our house and landed on my head. I was in and out of consciousness on the way to the hospital via ambulance. When I recovered they said I was legally dead at one point at the hospital, but they revived me with paddles after 5 minutes. I remember nothing at all, only the darkness of a deep dreamless sleep. The headache when I came to was unbearable. I was extremely lucky not to have any major spinal damage from the fall. Just a huge lump on my head that went away after about a week. No other injuries. Aside from the experience everyone really talks about when they are dying, while they think it is what they experience when they are actually dead, such as seeing a light or loved ones, there was absolutely nothing. No sense of calm, no darkness, nothing. One moment I was dying and seeing things, and the next I was coming back alive. Pretty uneventful. I shot dope, got really high, then dropped to the floor. My friends packed my groin with ice cubes and took turns punching me in the face, but I just lay there, unresponsive. EMTs saved me. I almost certainly suffered some amount of brain damage, as I was gone for several minutes. There was no bright light, nothing noteworthy. I'm convinced that when you go, you're worm food, no fancy cosmic procession. The paramedics treated me like human garbage after I came back, and for most of the ambulance ride to the hospital. They treated me like an actual person once I was lucid enough to be articulate. All I could think of was my mother. If I had stayed dead, she would have perished from grief. Last time I ever stuck a needle in my arm. About 13 years ago. It was 4 days after I had given birth. I was sitting on my bed holding my son when I suddenly woke up. My son was on the bed and my mom was asking if I was okay. She told me I had a seizure. Now, I've had them before. Last one had been 13 years ago, but this one felt different. I told her to call an ambulance. They get there and I tell them what happened and get loaded into the back. That's all I remember physically until the next day when I woke up in the hospital with my husband sitting in the chair next to my bed. Apparently, I had eclampsia that caused seizures and a high fever. He said at one point they had to revive me. During this I remember dreaming that I had a choice whether I wanted to live or die. I thought about it and knew my husband couldn't handle 2 kids by himself, so I decided to stay. Everything went dark and I woke up in a hospital bed. After I woke up I had trouble with my memory and still do at times. My husband doesn't like to talk about it, so it's hard to get all the details. I had worked in medicine prior to this, so I knew the brain can cause things like this to happen, so I just chalk it up to that. Thought I'd buck the usual trend of peaceful nothingness with my father's experience. He was slowly dying for weeks after his gallbladder removal was utterly botched, and the hospital interpreted as pleased to do something about the wrenching pain to mean he was a druggie obviously looking for a score. It all came to a head one day when my 10-year-old sister had to call 911 because my father was literally about to die. The doctor told my mother that my father's levels were no longer compatible with life. He was pretty much dead, his heart had stopped several times, so she should expect to lose her husband any time. My father remembers being in the room, slightly above everyone, watching like a spectator. He was accepting death, but was very sad about it. He had 3 young children he wanted to see grow up. He didn't want to go. He remembers thinking and feeling these things while he watched doctors try to get him going again. His next memory was waking strapped to the hospital bed with a breathing tube down his throat. Got one arm free and pulled out the tube before someone found him. Over 25 years later he's survived lots of stuff: stage 4 cancer, Graves' disease, various forms of hepatitis, but that was the closest to death he got, and for him in that exact circumstance, there was some existence outside his body. The only thing I remember is that there was no light, no tunnel, no clouds or anything. Just peace, the most amazing peace I've ever felt. Nothing mattered and I wanted to be like that forever. Then I started to hear like a whisper, "Please breathe, please wake up." It was my aunt giving me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in the car while someone else was driving. That's when I knew I wasn't breathing. When we arrived to the ER I was rushed into one of the beds and my poor mom could see when the ECG showed that I was flatlining. Long story short, I'm here, but I spent 3 good hours trying to remember who I was because I couldn't even remember my mom or my name. Edit. Everybody have different experiences, this was mine. That doesn't mean that everyone's will be the same. I didn't make this post to make people think that dying is amazing. In my experience it was just nothing. If you need to talk to someone, please do it. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Life is beautiful and you are loved. Was crushed by a semi on an ice road. My entire existence turned into vibration or sound. Just a huge center of a thunderbolt crashing, shaking, booming vibration. Next thing I know, it all subsides and instead of pain, everything starts fading. I felt my bowels try to void, my lungs not respond to my desire to breathe, and then I was floating in a void with a bubble of light suspended some distance in front of me. It was incredibly relaxing, comforting and freeing. I knew without a doubt I had died. I wasn't scared or anything really, I had clarity of thought not skewed by emotion. I started to look at the light now and realized it was a projection of what my eyes were seeing through my slumped overhead. I could see my cell phone on the floor of my truck where my head was pointing, and had a thought about how I just died and I didn't say goodbye to my wife or my kids and how they're going to feel. I wished I could get to the phone, and suddenly I started moving forward and back into my normal frame of reference. I started breathing again, the pain started too. I slowly regained some motor function and reached for my phone, but I could feel the blood draining out of me and knew if I called anyone it would be for them to listen to me die. I was conscious again, so I was going to do something. I started feeling around to see what kind of shape I was in. I reached down to my leg, but my fingers just found burger meat. I grabbed at a chunk of jeans and flesh and started pulling until what was left of my lower leg came flopping out from being wrapped around the brake pedal. I then grabbed and squeezed as hard as I could, knowing most people die in this situation because it hurts too much to self-apply pressure on massive trauma. I did it anyways, while screaming with the effort. Long story short, other people came. I got bandaged and bounced around in the back of a pickup for 300 kms and then met the ambulance, got on the good gas and bounced between hospitals to get relimbed, stapled and stitched back together. I had a broken tibia, severed Achilles, multiple lacerations, a fractured hip, compressed spine, twisted wrist and a plethora of soft tissue damages and disruption from massive G-force trauma. 5 years later on, and I'm in pain every day, and if given another opportunity will just die. Pain every Drowned and alcohol poisoning. The drowning was when I was surfing and got caught in this washtub swirl thing. I fought like hell to get up to the surface but couldn't. Then it stopped and I was sinking to the bottom. I remember looking at the bubbles and the sunlight and thinking how beautiful it was before fading to black. Then boom, I have some dude with his lips on me and another crushing my chest. There was a crowd and my friends were sobbing. Salt water tore my lungs up and I got some weird post-drowning thing where I almost drowned to death again in the hospital. So, on to number 2, which happened roughly within a year of the first. Was playing quarters with Jack Daniels and I weighed 110 pounds at the time. Lights got all weird and fuzzy, couldn't walk, and passed out. Stopped breathing, but I guess my buddy saw me face plant and tried to wake me, but I wasn't responding. I guess that is when he realized I wasn't breathing and called an ambulance. Now, this one is weird because I was aware that I was dying. I mean, I was watching myself being worked on and loaded up. Then it felt like I was flying and I seemed to have arrived at this place with a river and a willow tree. That is all I can remember of that. But a few years after my best friend and best man of my wedding died, I had a dream where I was back at the river and the willow tree and he was there. I was so happy to see him and we talked. He told me a lot of things and gave me a message to give to his brother. So, when I woke up I drove over and I told his brother what had happened and gave him the message. His eyes got really big and then he started crying and hugged me. Before that his brother was really tore up and was having a hard time, but after I gave him that message he seemed to be at peace with everything. We are still really close. So, what do I think? I think my best friend and best man of my wedding will be there at the river under the willow tree when I die. Okay, so don't laugh, I'm deathly afraid of roaches for some reason. There was a night I was working on a friend's boat at the docks. Suddenly I'm attacked by a roach. It comes flying toward me out of nowhere. Instinctively duck and hit my head on the boat's railing. I don't feel any pain, but I touch my head and just feel blood gushing out. I look down and there's blood everywhere, dripping like it's coming from a leaking pipe. I then see everything going black and pass out. I didn't think of death or anything, I guess I was too much in shock. The entire incident from hitting my head to passing out must have lasted 5 to 10 seconds max. I woke up in a hospital bed feeling confused as how much time passed, but also strangely aware of what happened. It's like my brain continued on the same trend of thought and there was no memory loss. Apparently I'd been unconscious for 31 hours, and had stopped breathing and had no pulse at one point due to brain swelling. Doctors said it's likely my heart didn't stop, but I was just barely hanging on. I had to have emergency brain surgery, and at one point the doctors were telling my wife and parents that they didn't expect me to make it and that it's likely if I did I'd have severe brain impairments. Turns out I had literally no brain damage despite being technically dead once during it all. Does it count if I was strangled to death at school and after a few minutes I woke up in the nurse's office? Well, I can say it was dark, not really cold but not really warm. It gave me a feeling of neutrality, I think of it as a sort of limbo or purgatory place where they weigh your good and bad deeds to see where you go. I've never been religious and I've never really been scared of death. I've always accepted it as a natural thing that can't be avoided. Also, the guy who choked me out was looking at me weird saying, "Dude, it was super creepy when you didn't react." And as I was being choked out I was thinking, I guess this is how I die? Now I get to know what happens. I don't get why people are so afraid of death. It's a natural thing and whatever happens next happens next. Whether it be heaven, hell, reincarnation, or nothing at all, it doesn't really matter. Sure, I want a good afterlife too. But if you're not sure what will happen, don't worry about it until it happens. If anyone can explain what's so scary about it, I'd like to know.
I'd love it if you liked and subscribed.